Welcome to First Coat, where we explore public realm art, how it's made, and why it matters. I'm your host, Stephanie Echeveste, an artist and entrepreneur based in Brooklyn, New York. I run Distill Creative, where I curate and produce site-specific art projects for real estate developers. This week on First Coat, we have Sofía Maldonado, an artist based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Sofía has created various projects in New York with the Bronx Museum, the Times Square Alliance, Groundswell Community Project, and No Longer Empty, as well as the Ringling Museum in Florida, Real Artways in Connecticut, the 10th Havana Biennial in Cuba, and many more international mural collaborations. I spoke with Sofía about her public mural work, her studio practice, and how her art style has changed over time. You'll learn about how Sofía does art commissions, her thoughts on community-based work, and what's inspiring her right now. Here's our conversation. Welcome to First Coat. I can't wait to jump into today's interview. We have Sofía Maldonado here today, and she's actually in San Juan, Puerto Rico,
Yes.
which is where she is from, but she spent a lot of time here in Brooklyn, which is where I am right now. And I first saw her work at the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach. I was with my sisters, and they loved the wall, and I was like, who is this artist? So that's how I first found out about your work, and I had to learn more. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for the invitation.
Can you tell us about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Sofía Maldonado, and I am a Puerto Rican artist born from a Cuban mother. So I'm half Cuban, half Puerto Rican. But I live in New York for 8 years, and mainly my work is based in abstraction, murals, and also canvas work. And I also have another side of my work that is like more fun, that works with the female body and sensuality. And it taps into my Latina roots, subjects like reggaeton and trap. So I've done a few projects that are sort of like more drawing, and it has a more performance aspect too. So I divide myself in those two scenarios. I am also a professor. I teach in different universities in Puerto Rico, and I am a mentor as well for different type of organizations that work with youth programs.
Awesome. Yeah, I watched one of your videos with the, I think it was like female trap. Is that the one? Which was so cool. It made me so happy because I really miss going to clubs. Like I haven't been dancing in a very long time now. And so seeing that and seeing the energy and like the shots you captured was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a project that was titled FemTrap, and I started it right after the Hurricane Maria hit the island. Mm-hmm. The island was like totally stopped, no cultural programming, no water, no electricity, nothing, right? And then once things started to pick up, I decided to launch that project in a very small gallery / dive bar. And it's a project I started a year ago in New York, specifically in Greenpoint. It was a residency I did in a space that's called Point Green, based in Greenpoint. And Carlo McCormick, the curator, was the one that referred me to that residency. And it was a very free residency, and that's where I developed the project. I started listening to Hispanic trap, especially women, and I got obsessed with their videos, like their YouTube videos. So I did a huge list of YouTube videos, and I used to take screenshots of the videos to draw them, to develop a series of watercolors. Eventually, when I presented the project, I included the videos as a projection. So it was a video projection. It lasted like 2 hours. It was like a loop. And then, of course, the drawings. When I got back to Puerto Rico, the hurricane happened. And then when things started to pick up, I wanted to do an exhibition that had like slightly more party vibe. Mm-hmm. So the projection became sort of like a soundtrack of the exhibition / party, because it was projected in the dance floor. And the drawings had a different space. And that night we sort of improvised. Friends of mine and I, we transformed ourselves into, I don't know, like sort of like trap culture. I don't know characters, we could say, like, and then one of my friends had a pole, so we started like pole dancing and like just doing a very freestyle performance that we didn't even rehearse. And that gave like that opened like a new direction for that project. And then along that year, 2018, that project represented different performances. And eventually, in November of 2018, the project was part of a special project in Mega Art Fair, which is an art fair that they've been doing now for, I think, like 3 years in Puerto Rico. So it has its own specific booth, and then I was able to present like a more formal aspect of the project. So I had the drawings, and this time there were more drawings than the prior. There were more detailed, and I had the projection of the video that documented the project of our performances. And then, of course, I had some merch, because I always like to have some sort of like more accessible artwork for younger collectors or art enthusiasts. So yeah, that was like a really interesting project. And I do those type of project, and then I go back to mural painting, or while doing that, I'll do mural painting. It could be in different art festivals, or I do private commissions. So it's interesting to have this duality, because it helps me to play on one side, even though it's very formal. And then when I'm doing the paintings and I'm working in a more abstract language, I am much more serious and like more structured. So it's nice to have that flexibility in your practice.
Yeah, for sure. What role do you think art has in public space?
Well, for me, it's very important, because imagine we live in a city where you're constantly bombarded with like ads, right? You have billboards, you have this subway ad, you had like your phone, and everything is like visual. But then when you encounter like an art piece in a park, or an art piece in the subway station, or just in the outdoor, it could be a mural, your perspective of your day, of your scenario changes. You have a moment of like admiring an artwork, that can speak to you and can give you that peace of mind that sometimes we need throughout the day. So public art is very important. I think it's essential, between having parks and having art in the city. I mean, there's no way we could like survive otherwise, So for me, when I do my abstract work, I always think of that. I always think like of the public that would encounter it, how it would like just interact with. Like you say, you saw my work in the Mola and how it like impacted you. Imagine before that was a wall that was like painted, I don't know, gray, So it's very different in that scenario. Like you go to a museum that has a huge wall painted gray, rather than having a huge wall with a really big mural, and it's like has this Caribbean Latino flow, so it definitely molds the site. So that's something very important for me as well. When I paint, I really think of the site, like how can this piece integrate with the site? Like it doesn't push itself, for example, it doesn't invade a community, I have a project that I did long time ago in Real Artways in Connecticut, specifically in Hartford. And it was a mural piece that was in this street that is very Puerto Rican community, very strong presence. And the mural was going to be mounted on a historic building, so it can be painted on the building. We have to build like a structure. And from each window, it was 6 windows, there were a female character coming out, like, I don't know, like maybe some, I don't know, saying hi or... And these characters, they were like maybe like 3 feet tall on wood panels. And in one of my walks, because another thing I like to do when I get commissions, especially community commissions, is I like to walk in the neighborhood. I like to, I don't know, go to the nail salon, go to the panaderia, like to the little food truck. I like to meet people and be like, hey, I'm an artist doing this and that in your neighborhood, get to know some locals. So in that trip, I went to the nail salon and I loved it. And then I told the girls, like, hey, they were artists, their portfolio was like impeccable. And I'm like, hey, I'm doing this project around the corner. I have this wood panel girls. Would you like to pimp them up? And they were like, yeah. So I brought them, and of course I paid them, like they were like clients, and the girls did their nails. They did like eyelashes, tattoos, eyeshadow. So they like pimped the girls, and then I took those characters and put them on the mural. And I think that was a very organic collaboration, but it also included females from that community. So they felt identified with that mural. It's not just me coming into the community and painting and then peace out, Mm-hmm. And then they were reviewing the local newspaper. So I like to do that type of projects if it's possible,
How do you think more artists can make that possible in their work?
Well, I mean, that's something I have thought about before, but I got to the conclusion that a lot of artists that work in public space, we don't all have the same priorities, Mm-hmm. Some people love to just paint and not interact with anybody, Mm-hmm. And it's not of me to say, hey, you're doing that wrong. I think every artist has their own way of working. But I always advise, and it's always been in my art statement, I would say, the fact that I like to interact with locals. It's important. I think it's important to interact with locals because at the end of the day, you are in their space,
Definitely. I hear what you're saying, that some different artists just have different approaches to different things.
Yeah. I mean, we can battle all day about it, So, but
yeah.
We're not gonna get anywhere. So I think if you're an artist and if you can adapt that to your work, amazing. If you don't feel like doing it, then I don't want to argue about that. I'd rather argue about other stuff, But it's definitely very important, I would say. Like, it's something that's very important to interact with the community, because at the end you're leaving and the piece is staying,
Can you talk about your process in doing a public project, and also maybe how those projects come about? Like, how do people find you? What do you normally do? How do you budget for that? If you're taking time to go on walks or spend time in the community, is that something that you build into your fee, or is that just something that is wrapped up in what you might charge for something?
Well, it depends on what project we're talking. Usually when you get invited to public art festivals, there's like a specific fee. Mm-hmm. And usually they are the ones that find you the wall. Mm-hmm. You can have a talk with the organizers, maybe suggest like, hey, I work in abstraction. I need a wall that the person is open to that. If you have more specific project, you can ask, to get in contact with a non-for-profit that works with, say, example, if I work with women, maybe I will ask like, hey, is there any organization or skateboarding too? I've done that before. Like, I remember on an exhibition that I had in the Ringling Museum, it was called Beyond Bling, and it was a group show with Kahili Wiley, Micheline Thomas, and I. And on that exhibition, I had some work inside the museum, but I also suggested the museum, like, hey, if you have a youth program, I would like to work with the community. Will you happen to know if there's a skate park around? And they found the skate park. They linked me up with the community, skateboarding community, and then we ended up doing a piece that was painted with different assistants and local youth. And eventually we did like a little skate parade for the little ones, because there was a law in Sarasota that you weren't able to ride your skateboard in the city. Super weird. But it was nice because, most of these kids have never ride the skateboard in the street. So the parade gave them the possibility. And then we ended up in the skate park and we had a little skate jam, and that was amazing. And I like to do that type of projects, where I also, even though I'm invited for a specific project, I also suggest like, hey, is there any possibility to interact with a specific community? Mm-hmm. Then for the private commission, say if architecture firm or interior design firm if we're working with a hotel or like a corporation, something like that, that's very different because they are the ones that are in the middle and they're the ones having the conversation with the client. Mm-hmm. So most of the time they look for my work for very specific reasons. Either they want abstraction or they want like more Caribbean sort of vibe. And that's like a back and forth conversation, but it's always very respectful because they already know how I work. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they're asking me to do something that's not on my range, you know? And budget-wise, also, sometimes they ask me to quote, but most of the time they already have a budget they're working with. So I sort of manage what's the budget they're working. Sometimes the budget covers only the art. Sometimes the budget covers the art, the materials, and if there's any other equipment that we have to rent. And of course, an extra fee for an assistant. Mm-hmm. So the conversation is always very different. And as for how I organize myself, I do usually 3 prior sketch. We have a meeting and they decide which sketch they like. I also, prior to the sketch, ask them if they have a specific piece they have seen in my website that are interested. So that way I know where to drive and design the prior sketch. And then once we have the selection between the 3 sketches, then we do like a second round. Sometimes they're like, hey, can you have a little bit of this sketch mixed with this other sketch? And it's funny, also color is very important because some corporations are like, no, we cannot use this color because it's like the color of the other corporation that is like our enemy. So I'm like, okay, so we're not using, or maybe the client is like, no, red is not good for my business. So in that type of thing, I'm like, okay, so we're not using that color. And then I start sort of like working towards a second sketch that is more in the client's vision. And then we could go to a third sketch, but usually from the second, we're pretty close, you know, maximum third sketch, I would say, you know, otherwise we'll just go forever because with art, you can keep doing changes and, you know, you got to decide, you know, it's like a tattoo. You're getting tattooed or not, you know? But I enjoy either or scenarios because sometimes I get very inspired from these projects, you know, from the discussions, and then it also nurtures my next work, you know, because I might try a different version or I might try a different use of the colors that I use in that client's mural, you know? So I think everything is like a continuous dialogue.
Have you worked on any projects for like you were saying, an interior designer for an office space or a hotel or an apartment building and then did you hear how people interacted with the piece later?
Yeah, I usually ask like how it was. You know, I've been working a lot with a consulting firm that their name is Turning Art. They're based in Boston. And usually when I finish the projects, I don't have much interaction with the office, but I ask, you know, like, hey, how did it go? I did another project for the hotel, Dorado Beach Hotel, the Ritz-Carlton in Dorado, here in Puerto Rico, and the same. Things like, is there sites where you can go back? It's weird, no? And then you just kind of, because that was like their main suite, you know, it was like a whole house. And
oh wow, like inside where someone would actually pay to stay, basically.
It was, yeah. So, yeah, and it's like super, like, I cannot even imagine how much is the night. Like, it's a billionaire thing, you know? But then I ask because I like to know. Sometimes I don't even know, but I do think I can see how it shapes the space. Where you get more feedback, especially when you're painting outside. When you're painting outside, you get people walking by, you know, and they talk to you. But when you're doing these projects indoor, you're usually either working at night or working, you know, when there's like nobody around or it's been remodeled and it's just construction workers. So the feedback mainly comes from the designer, you know. Another important thing is that prior to finishing the wall, I have a visit. I have 2 visits usually. First visit where I'm like, hey, this is the direction of the mural. We're halfway. Look how it's coming along. And with turning art, they usually bring people from the firm. They do like a little mix of different, from the CEO to the secretary. They do like different, like a mix, and they all comment. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Okay, I'll do that. Then I'll do the changes, and then I present, hey, this is the change that you said. We're about to finish in 2 days. What do you think? You know? And they're like, yeah, I love it, or change this, or I don't know, this color is too much. And then I'll do the last touch-ups, and we're good, you know? And then clear coat, and we're out.
Interesting. That's really cool to be brought into different like cultures, like company cultures.
Yeah, especially nowadays, there's like a new scenario in the workspace where they're trying to create a more vivid and more fun workspace. From what I've noticed, I did another project here in Puerto Rico in another, like a workspace where you can rent, like work rent,
like a co-working,
that thing. And I know the owner, and every time she sees me, she's like, oh my God, I love, you know, it gives such a different vibe to the office. I also did in New York, I did Outbrain. It's another co-working space. And I can see it, like it's just changed the whole scenario of the office, of the space. And I think it's very important, you know, especially for people that are like more than 6 hours, you know, 8 hours, 10 hours, you know, inside an office. I think you really need to have some artwork.
Right.
Otherwise you'll go insane.
Yeah. Just looking at white walls. The only mural I've ever painted, the first one, is in it's a shared office space with my fiance. Like I have a studio, and then he has like his employees. And I was like, this is a wall. Can I just paint it? Because I mean, it exists and it's there, but it was really fun to do. And I did do it like collaboratively with his employees, where we went out and took pictures, and then they took their favorite photos of the neighborhood, and I kind of incorporated it into the piece.
And people love being part of the process, because then they feel like, okay, I worked on this, you know. And I think it's important for them to be part of the process, because then they're gonna appreciate it even more.
Right. Yeah. And it's so different than like what they're normally doing all day. Just probably even being able to talk to you and giving you feedback on your work is probably really interesting. So
definitely.
What tips do you have for other artists working in public space, particularly for someone who maybe hasn't done that much in the public sphere and is doing like painting on canvas, or even doing like sculpture work in a more fine art setting?
Like you want to transition to public art. One thing is transition into public art, another thing is transition into murals, which I always do separate things, you know, because public art, it could be so many things. If you're a sculptor, you know, doing small sculpture, you can do larger sculptures, you know. As for mural, I would say if you just want to get yourself out there and known, you just got to start DIY. You got to paint as much as you can. Even if you don't get paid, just go out there and knock some doors like, hey, can I paint your wall? Build yourself a portfolio. If you don't have murals, then at least you have like some paintings that you can show, or drawings or sketches. And once you get out there, you'll see like things start to flow. Like I feel like when you paint in the city or like in an outdoor space, people start to communicate with you, and you connect with this whole network of possibilities, you know. You might get like a possible next mural gig, you know, or at least you document it and put it in your Instagram, and all of a sudden a mural festival sees your mural and they invite you, you know. So I think don't be afraid, just go for it. Then as for public art, I would say there you need more funding, there you need more strategy. So it'll be nice to have a more structured idea of what you want and apply for more open calls. I think that's a good start with public art, and then you need to know about budgeting and all that, but that's, you know, you can learn that like online. So It's a matter of losing the fear. Just get yourself out there and work in new scenarios.
Are you an artist? Submit your portfolio at distillcreative.com/artist. You'll get on our Distill directory, our artist database, and be considered for upcoming art commissions. How has your style changed over time? And can you talk about your move to doing more abstraction? I guess now you're doing both, but...
Yeah, definitely. Well, I started at a very young age. I would say like maybe 16. I was in an art high school, but I started doing murals because I had a lot of friends that were into hip hop. And then, of course, they were into graffiti in Puerto Rico. And we started going on the weekends to paint walls illegally, eventually legally. But I've always painted with latex paint because it's where I found there were like more richer colors. Back in those days, the only spray paint that we could find was Krylon. And it's like the brand that you find in any hardware store. Now there's like more graffiti oriented cans, and you have so many colors. But back in the day, we didn't have that. And I'm all about color. So I started painting murals with my graffiti friends. And then one thing that I noticed is that I was not really into creating like square or like rectangular compositions. I was more interested in how the building or the wall looked. And I enjoy that rich deterioration that we have in the Caribbean when the cement starts to crack and the building haven't been painted for like 10 years. And of course, there is so many abandoned spaces, especially on those days. And because now the scenario has changed because the laws of Puerto Rico have changed and there have been a lot of like more international influx. But back in the days, it was like zombie land, especially the area of Santurce. That's where we used to paint. So my paintings were very organic forms, and they would like wrap around the building. So the structure was very, very important for me. Like where the building that I would select. Eventually, I studied BFA. My BFA in La Escuela de Artes Plásticas, which is an art school based in San Juan, very important school. And there I started working more with graphic design, and I graduated eventually with a BFA of graphic design. And then my mural started to get more graphic, and my thesis project was a 112 feet long mural. It was huge. And I painted it only with one scaffold that it was like 8 feet wide, like long, 8 feet long. And I just move it all the way to the wall. And I had a lot of friends that will help me paint. So I started sort of like shifting and creating like a more of a graphic element while doing murals. And the same thing, being very aware of not having a background. So I would not frame my murals on a background. So I would just kind of like navigate through the building. And that has to do a lot with practices similar to Gordon Mata Clark and artists that work with the city or artists that were working color field painting. While going to the university, I started to shift, And then when I did my master in Pratt Institute, I had the honor to take a class, and also eventually he was my thesis professor. His name is Ernesto Pujol. He's a Cuban artist, and he works a lot with performance. But he was the one that taught me how to use my studio, how to have more of a formal approach to painting. Because the first year, I would say semester, in my MFA, I had no idea what to do with my studio because I was constantly painting murals. So I didn't have like a formal studio practice. And then I remember for the open studios, I just threw a punk show in my studio. And I guess that's a way of using your studio, no? So space and site has always been very important for me. Of course I can talk about murals, but when I think about murals, I think more like the impact in the space. Eventually, when I graduated, I started working on different projects that were more towards public art, like the one I told you in Real Artways. Then I got a commission in the Times Square Alliance, doing another really big mural in 42nd Street. And then I started exhibiting in different museums and galleries, and eventually started featuring my work in art fairs. Another important part of my work is that I interact a lot with the skateboarding scene, because for me it's a community that can not only appreciate my work, but they can write over it. So for my thesis in Pratt, my MFA thesis, what I did is I went back to Puerto Rico, and then I found this abandoned pool in the middle of the rainforest in El Yunque. And with a group of friends, we took all the weeds and took all the leaves, and there were like plants growing. So we cleaned the whole space, and then we cemented it. I paint the bowl, right? And then we did like a skate jam. And then it's beautiful to see skaters just riding on top of your piece, you know? So I think something that has always driven me is like, how can my work impact the audience, and how can the audience kind of walk inside of it? And on that note, on 2015, I moved back from New York to Puerto Rico, and I created this project called Calaña. And Calaña was an abandoned factory, tobacco factory, in the town of Caguas, which I transformed into a temporary, ephemeral community hub. And then on that project, I painted the inside of the factory rather than the outside. The main piece was in the inside, and it was like floor, ceiling, and walls. So when you go inside the piece, it was like a huge factory, abandoned, nothing inside, only like columns and blocked up windows. It's beautiful. Like I have it in my website, the whole documentation. And eventually, one of the photos of that piece was exhibited in the Whitney Biennial as part of Occupy Museum's project on 2017, that it talked about the debt, the student loan debt, and artists that had debt with Banco Popular, like me. And especially that project Calaña was oriented and was done while the economic crisis in Puerto Rico in 2015, that we had like a big crash, and there were a lot of abandoned buildings. And the idea of that project was to suggest how artists can take over these abandoned buildings and create them into a more useful scenarios, you know? Also using abstraction in space.
That brings up a lot of questions. I've seen these projects on your website, and they're part of why I'm so excited to talk to you, because I think they're inspiring to see, in that you've taken initiative to actually like find spaces and then collaborate with people, but also logistically, they probably had some headaches, like insurance, access, safety. I don't know, just like all these things that become more difficult. I think there's the route of just the DIY, like finding space and doing the project and then documenting it, and then you get more projects, but then that inevitably brings about more problems because then if someone's commissioning for a project, then it's like, but also you need insurance, or also you need to like do this and that and that. So like I think that's what's interesting to me about your work, is that you continue to go back to find new avenues to explore new spaces, regardless of anyone asking you to do it, basically. It seems like
I definitely live by the DIY flow. And the DIY, like you were saying earlier, like if you're a young artist or if you're a studio artist, like, oh, I want to get out, you can't really wait for somebody to be like, hey, I have a commission for you. You got to do it. Like you DIY it first and then see what happens. You know, that's how the abstract paintings, when I did that shift of like, I was working on the female characters still while in New York. And then I decided, it was 2012, that I decided to do like a change, 2012, 2013 probably. I already had like a follower of clients that were really into my figurative work. And I said, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to paint more girls, at least for now. I thought it was going to be forever, but nothing is forever. And then I shift to abstraction, and of course it hurt my career for a minute because people were like, she went crazy. And that's another thing, you can't really like drive your career because of you have some like clients that you don't want to confuse them, or you have like established like line, and you don't want like the art market to whatever with the art market, like let them follow you, follow them. So when I switched, of course, I was like maybe like 3 years of like, wow, nobody's getting it. But the important thing when I did the shift is that I was very specific. I had like a very specific language. I study a lot. I study Caterina Gross. I went to Berlin. I study Morocco. I study a lot of, I was like, if I'm going to transition, I'm going to transition very serious. This is not like me going crazy. And even though I had a vocabulary, I was like, I don't want to call these pieces murals. They're interventions in the space, and I didn't want it to use the word graffiti or mural, or like, I wanted to use like a whole different language, and I would educate people and be like, hey, no, this is not a mural. This is an intervention in the space. That's why I'm like spraying in the wall, in the ceiling, in the floor, and I would talk about color field painting, and then people start to be like, okay, she knows what she's doing. And nowadays I feel like very comfortable working sometimes very figurative, right? And I have all this work that's about sensuality, and now in the pandemic I'm working more towards digital, this whole side of like femininity, women and characters I'm creating. And then I have the other side of abstraction that has been fitting very well in different private commissions, and something that started so anarchic, all of a sudden I have like there's a hotel here that the lobby is like a huge abstract wall that I did. It's called Serafina Hotel in Condado. So it's interesting how when you give it time and you keep pushing and pushing, then all of a sudden a market opens, and understands that shift that you did in your line of thought.
In regards to your abstraction work, what feeling do you want people to get when they either walk in it or on it or buy it?
Well, it depends of the scenario, but I always go back to the idea that I feel abstraction gives you a moment to just use your imagination, right? Because you're not seeing something that you can recognize visually. You're just seeing paint and color and drips, and I think that's where every human tunes in with your inner self. Nobody's telling you what it is. You don't have like a previous reference to it, so it's like a meditation. Even if you are like not meditating in front of the mural, if you're walking the stairs and you just saw like a glimpse of it, I think it definitely impacts your subconscious. And like I always say, abstraction is an expression of the heart, it's very pure.
Do you keep a sketchbook?
I do, but my sketchbook is more for writing, I would say. When I do the murals or I do like sketches, I've been using a lot of my iPad, because I can just do like a really quick sketch, or I can put the photo of the space and then paint over it, and I can see how it looks, But more my sketchbooks are more for writing and just ideas and just like kind of letting go like thoughts, and that helps a lot too. But most of my sketches for the past, I would say, maybe 5 years have been like more digital.
Interesting. What do you use on your iPad? Are you using like Procreate?
I use a program that's called Procreate. Yeah. For now, it's been Procreate, and it helps. But then I also have, usually when I go to residencies, I like to work a lot on gouache, acrylic gouache. And then that's another very intimate part of my creative process. When I want to start something new, I go back to the gouache because it's smaller, and it tunes me in with a different side of me, It goes back more to the roots, to feeling not so digital. But then, most of the sketch, again, go back to digital because it's easier to send to the client, and it's just easier to visualize the whole project when you can just drop in a photo of the site.
Right. Do you send full renderings? If you're commissioned for a project, do you send them a rendering? Say you've gone through the first sketch and the second sketch. When you say sketch, is that a rendering with color, or is it more of just the concept?
No. No, it has color, and it's as similar as it could be to the idea. But I always have a disclosure for all the clients that it's abstraction. And remember, this is a digital sketch, and I'll be working in painting. Very different medium, and a very free medium. I mean, there's going to be some drips that I can really probably manage in a digital sketch. And there's always a conversation that happens when I'm painting with the wall, with the piece, that's definitely not happening in the digital sketch. Mm-hmm. So there's the freedom, and there's an understanding that the client needs to have when he or she encounters the final piece. And that's why while I paint, there's 2 visits, to the site. But when it is a mural festival that you have, you're free to do whatever you want, usually, right? Unless you have a wall that is of a small business and they're very no, I want to see this, But otherwise, in mural festivals, there's more flexibility, and you can, that's where I usually do my most anarchic kind of projects, For example, I did a really, really amazing, huge building in a festival called Beyond Walls in Lynn, Massachusetts. And there I had freedom. But I know that the client had an agreement with the festival. I think they have to have 2 years to leave the building like that. And eventually they had freedom to erase it. And eventually they erased it. But it's just nice. It's really nice to have those small projects where you can just be super free. And most of the time, those free projects are the one that nurture the more corporate projects because, the client can have that project as an example. Mm-hmm. So everything starts to feed. It's like a chain, everything feeds itself. And some of the works like this one in studio, I could start a piece like that, and eventually this piece inspired a mural that I painted in Wynwood in Miami. So yeah, sometimes the murals and the abstractions in the space inspire the canvas work, and sometimes it's the other way around.
That's interesting. So there's a back and forth dialogue between work in your studio, work in physical space, and then work that might be commissioned because they've seen something else you've done.
Yeah.
Are you a real estate developer looking for a unique amenity for your site? Get our free guide, 10 tips for commissioning a site-specific artwork, at our website, distillcreative.com. I want to ask you some questions about how you maintain relationships and also when you're collaborating, if you have any tips. On a video that I saw on YouTube for Sonica Feminista, you say, maintain very clear communication so I don't get run over, about how you maintain your leadership on a project. What other tips do you have for other artists or organizers who are leading, and particularly if they are not a man leading in the space?
I would say, as for collaborations, just always have to be very clear where everybody stands. If it's a project that you're working and you're inviting people to collaborate of it, or if it's a collaboration, which is I've learned that the hard way. Sometimes you are working on a project and you invite people to collaborate, but then they think it's a collaboration between both of you, and that's not the case. The case is my project and you're collaborating with me. It just clears everything so people don't feel like they're being run over, or they're being disrespected. I think those lines have to be very clear. I'm not part of any collective. Usually when I've done things are more like that, we're 2 artists and then we collaborate. I recently did a digital collaboration with a friend of mine called Radamés Juni Figueroa. He's a really well-known artist. and we are like really straight about it, we did this digital design together. And for example, if we're going to use that design for a different purpose, then we have to talk about that. And as for projects that are being run by women, I would say sometimes us women, we have to level ourselves to have better communication, because sometimes women can be very competitive between themselves, and we need more like sisterhood. We got to create that, because I feel we are in a man's world and we've been trained to always be like defensive and always be like, I don't know, not so supportive of each other. So I think that's something that we have to learn in order to help ourselves to keep growing, not see the other person as somebody that can be a menace, more of a woman that you're like empowering, so we can both grow together or evolve in the project. So yeah, definitely more sisterhood. Women, we need to take on roles that you could feel in the beginning intimidated because there's a lot of men, but it's like anything else. You grow and you learn how to navigate an all men world without having to not be yourself. I think clear communication and just not double think yourself. Perhaps not be super bossy, be more like listen to people, step away a little bit from your ego and step away from the scenario like, I am a woman, I'm Latina, and this is why all this stuff happens, and I have a wall and I'll never make it. If you think like that in the morning, then yeah, of course you will never make it. So be positive. I think be positive and stay tuned with your nature.
That's really good advice. I think especially with the sisterhood, not competition, particularly with mural artists, there are so few female identifying mural artists who get seen, even though there might be a lot more out there, which is something that I think is really bizarre still when I look at who's getting certain work or commissions or who's being kind of celebrated. It's still kind of like, oh, and these are the women doing it, instead of just having them within the fold.
Actually, talking about that, I'm going to send you a link of an organization based in Argentina that a friend of mine, she's one of the founders. It's called Amura. And they have a very interesting approach empowering women that are mural painters. It's an organization that they're like trying to open the market of either public or governmental commissions of women artists in Argentina. So they're very well organized. And I feel a movement like that can definitely make big changes. If we had similar movements like that, I think we can eventually do more of a change. I have another friend, Erin. She's a muralist in Los Angeles, and she started another group called When She Rises. It's not only for mural painters, it's more for female artists, and they do different festivals, different exhibitions. So I mean, definitely there are different women that have targeted and have created this space to give more of a voice to women. I'm all about those projects. But right now, the only project that I did in a similar scenario was FemTrap, where I collaborated with younger painters and performers that were formerly my prior students. And so when we did these performances, they were invited to exhibit, and they were invited also to do their performance as part of the collective FemTrap. But after that, I've been mainly focusing more on painting and more on my studio work. So I admire the women that, have like this more formal projects that, they dedicate like time of their life, to make that more of a specific change. My perspective has always been more like, when I teach, I love to empower the women in my class. I talk to them very straight. Maybe I'm a little bit more rigorous with them because I want them to, have that hard skin when they get out there. Everybody, I feel, empowers the way they feel they can,
Right. However they can jump in.
Right.
Yeah. What's something you wish you had known when you had first started being an artist professionally? Because I know you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I think I would have loved to have mastered more photography, being able to document my own project, my own pieces, rather than having to have like a third party, because it would have saved me a lot of misunderstandings, and I'll probably have a better hard drive with my earlier work, because I have some work that have like been lost throughout hard drives and computers, like have more of that documentation, more straight. But other than that, I think it's been a nice ride. It's been a nice ride of learning experience throughout the years.
What are some resources that have helped you along the way?
Well, I love reading biographies. I love documentaries on artists. I love like anything like Art21 example, that they go to artist studios and they ask them very specific questions, and you get a glimpse of their work scenario, or maybe their a day with the artist. I like those. And interviews, like when I teach, I tell my students, if you want to get good, say, at a specific subject, and you feel you have found an artist that has been working in a similar pattern or similar thematic, you should just devour anthropophagia with that artist, just like eat it, everything that you can, and then you just spit it out on your own terms, because that's a way of learning. You can just try to understand that artist or that master or that subject that you want to develop, so you have to really focus on it. And if you can see like documentaries, interviews, podcasts, whatever you can, just the more information you have on you, it's going to be the easiest to deconstruct and then create a path for yourself.
Is there anything you're reading or watching or listening to right now that's been inspiring you?
Well, I recently read the Georgia O'Keeffe biography, and I loved it because she spent like half of her life in isolation. When she had her studio in New Mexico in the middle of the desert. Now we're here in the pandemic, like, oh, I have to be in my house. And it haven't even passed, like, I don't know, like a month. I mean, now we're more than a month. But imagine, like, she will go, of course, she's in a beautiful scenario, But the idea of isolation, like sometimes I'm really all about isolation. I love being on my own. I love having time in studio on my own, even though maybe I'll listen to a podcast, but I love that time. Like, and I think if you're an artist, most of your artists could tell you about that time where you're like alone and like things start to like, and although all these ideas and like all the insecurities and securities and like ideas, and it's like a world. All of a sudden you're in your world, right? And I love that. And then when I read her biography, and I'm like, of course, like no wonder her work is so solid. She was like 3 months without seeing a human being in the middle of the desert. That's what everybody should do, like you should just go 3 months every year to the middle of the desert, and then you'll see your imagination and your psychic is gonna like elevate. There's no way. So
I haven't read that. I want to read it now.
You should. Yeah, I'll send you a screenshot of it's a small book, because I don't like biographies that are like a Bible, like I'm like
500 pages.
I need like a more reduced and fun, quick, biography. Also, I like a lot looking for quotes. Like, say I've been reading a lot of Octavio Paz quotes, and they're so in tune with what is happening right now. So I love to find things from the past that relate to the actual moment, and you're like, yeah, no wonder. It's a cycle. Life is a cycle. And then I think once you get that smooth ride, when you understand that it's a cycle, okay, sometimes you're feeling good, sometimes you're feeling bad, and then you just don't go all the way in the depression, So It's just like, oh, tomorrow I'll probably feel better, And I think that helps a lot, especially when we are in these times that when we have we don't know where things are going, we don't know when we'll be able to live a new normal scenario, when we're going to be able to travel, even taking the subway, things like that. I think it's important to be more aware of how our mind, works. and how that affects our physical body, which is what happens when you're like in studio by yourself as an artist. You have all these thoughts, you have all this mind work, and then eventually you just project it into a piece of art, that has a concept and then you have to explain where that concept came from. So yeah, I would say those are my feedback to everybody in the podcast.
Yeah. We'll definitely link to them in the show notes so other people can check them out.
Sure.
Thank you so much for the interview today. Do you have anything else you want to share?
Right now, I have a piece coming up in Boston with Turning Arts, but I have to figure out, travel logistics, which I guess we're on hold for now. And I have another piece coming up in Puerto Rico that it was going to be a mural, and now it's going to be a digital mural, and that's very, very different. It's going to be like a very new path, and I am very excited to start working on it. So it will be some sort of like a wallpaper, but rather than having like a repeating pattern, it will be like a whole and it will be my first mural design on a digital platform, and then it will be printed and mounted up. And I'm looking forward to that. One of the good things that the new normal has brought to me. Other than that, I've been working in my studio the more digital drawings, and I might have I might release them on my birthday on July 17th, but I'm still debating how I'm gonna show them and all that, because they're more like on the side of the female characters. So let's see how that goes.
Where can we find you online?
Well, I have an Instagram account. It's Sofia Maldo, SOFIAMALDO. And my website, sofiamaldonado.com. And I also have a LinkedIn and Facebook, but you can find that throughout my website.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for the interview.
Yeah, thank you. It was so nice to talk, Slick.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks so much for watching this episode of First Coat. If you liked this video, please subscribe and check out the next episode in our playlist. Let me know what else you want to learn about public realm art in the comments below. And follow us on Instagram at First Coat Podcast or at Distill Creative. First Coat is a production of my company, Distill Creative. Check us out at distillcreative.com.